here, it's just a glass of water, and I'm going to pose a bit of a question to you. Okay, now if I put a postcard over the top of this glass of water and turn the whole thing over, does the water stay in the cup? Couple of yeses, couple of no's. Okay, just try it. Yes, it does. Okay, and there's some really cool science around why this is actually happening. In the same way that when you jump into a pool or a body of water, you can feel all of that pressure on your body in all directions. The air is actually pushing on us in all directions as well. Air pressure isn't just a down thing, it's a sideways thing or an upwards thing, and in this case, it's pushing up with quite a lot of force on the bottom of that card. Now, different question, also safety net, important. If I take a bit of fly screen and I put the fly screen over the top of the glass and do the same experiment, does it still work? Does the water stay in the cup? I get this nice and tight around there. Note, safety net. Turn the whole thing over. Yes, it does. Exactly the same science is happening, okay? Upwards air pressure is keeping that postcard on the glass. Coolest thing about this is that I can now, remove the card. And for the most part, the water still stays in the glass. Slightly different thing happening here. Now you've got surface tension playing along. In the same way that if you fill up a glass of juice or water or something like that, you see what looks like a bit of a skin on top of the glass? Well, water is really good at holding on to itself, and it's doing that between all of the tiny little holes in the fly screen. I can break that surface tension. A little bit more water comes out. But largely, it's strong enough to hold all of the liquid inside the glass. Now, I really, really love this experiment, and I'm going to get to why in just a moment, but before I do, I want you to just think to yourself, am I a science person? Okay? Now, there will be a whole range of different answers in this room, from people who absolutely, yes, science is my calling, I know that that's what I want to do with my life, right through a spectrum to the other side of people who are just like, nah. Don't come near me with it, don't even look at it. And that's okay too. My favourite part about this is that regardless of what I do here, you know, it's cool that the water stays in the glass, and it's even cooler when you can pull the card away and it still stays there. But my favourite part about this is you. Because within that whole spectrum of people, in that particular moment, every single one of you was a science person. Okay? And why that is, I have a bit of a theory, all right? I've given you permission to be curious about something that you might not have seen before. And looking around the room, there was a shift in setting this up. Some people unclasped their hands, a few people sat forward. It's always good to get verbal feedback in these kinds of things. People say, oh, that's exciting. That's how I know I'm doing my job properly. And in that moment, it was okay to be wrong. Okay? It didn't matter if you had seen it before or not, if you didn't know what was about to happen or not. The point is that you had a bit of a guess, and we did it, and you learned from it. But what if you could go through your entire life with that attitude towards not knowing something? What if you could go through every single scenario and let go of a bit of that fear of not knowing what was going to come next? It sounds really hard, and it is hard, but it's possible. And I'm going to tell you how. But back to when I was at school, I've always been a really enthusiastic learner. It's been a lifelong passion of mine to keep learning. And at the moment, it's also a passion of mine to inspire learning in other people through things like this as a science communicator. But at school, whilst I thought that I was learning things like biology, calculus, geometry, ancient history, whatever it was, what I was actually learning was how to take a test and how to do it really well. What I learnt at school was how to read very particular teachers. It was how to pull out information from the one textbook that class was on. And it was how to figure out what I was going to be asked the next day, the next week, the next month. Until I managed to get to this stage where I thought I was really clever. I was doing really well in all of my classes, but I linked my own intelligence really, really closely with that grade. And when I got to uni, suddenly that didn't fly anymore because I only saw the teachers once a week. I couldn't stay with them long enough to read all the hints that they may or may not have been dropping. I didn't have a textbook that I could refer to all the time. All of a sudden, I had to ask questions to get what I wanted. And until that point, asking questions was terrifying, okay? And I'm not quite sure how we got here as a society, but asking questions, for some reason, was linked with being unintelligent. And there was a sense of shame in putting your hand up in class and admitting that you didn't know something. I'm seeing a couple of nods around the room. Is this something that people are familiar with, this feeling of not wanting to be vulnerable in asking a question? But when I looked around the room at uni, you could almost see the divide, okay? There were people like me up the back, terrified, didn't want to ask anything, didn't want to be involved. And people up the front of the class, comfortable, asking questions, challenging what it was that the lecturer had to say, and that as a concept was mind-blowing. The people were actively putting their hands up and saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand what it was that you wanted me to do there. Could you repeat that?" And this was a really big pivotal moment. What these people were doing was taking their learning experience and making it a journey rather than a number. And that was what I tried to do too. All of a sudden for me, I didn't care whether I was good or bad at biology. What my intelligence was linked to was working really hard at biology. And in some cases, it wasn't that I had failed chemistry, I just hadn't passed yet. There is an important distinction. In shifting my thinking, what happened was I became more comfortable, generally, about my own intelligence. I could freely ask questions in class, in team meetings, and I was okay with getting it wrong. All of a sudden, feedback was coming from failure. Failure wasn't something that stopped me in my tracks that I couldn't move forward from. It was something that pushed me on to do better. And this particular thinking is called going from a fixed mindset or a fixed intelligence to growth. Okay, and there's a lot of scientific and really quite in-depth literature about this phenomena because it works. And it works to expand your skill set and push your intelligence in a whole number of ways. All of a sudden, I was getting better at working in teams. I was getting better at critically problem solving. I was getting more creative in my approach to everything. And that's really important. But while that's my story, why should I be telling you this? Why is it important to you? Well, there's been a recent FYA study to suggest that 60% of current jobs that university students right now are studying for will be automated in the next 15 years. Just let that statistic sink in for a moment. 60% in 15 years is huge. That's, if your job is not being done by a computer, there are 6 people in the row alongside you whose are, and only 3 who's not. But there's a whole suite of things that computers are really, really good at. There's also a couple of things that they're not very good at. Things like creativity, things like working in teams, critically problem solving, and getting really good feedback from failure. But you're good at those things. And by being someone who's open to those skills, by asking more questions, by being comfortable to challenge the way you see your own intelligence, that's how you're going to make sure that all of these big ideas, these big problems like automation of jobs, right through to climate change or gender equality or economic equality, are going to be a walk in the park. Because it's going to be okay if you get something wrong. Now, I want you to think back to the last time you did ask a question. Maybe you put your hand up in class, or a team meeting, or a project brief, or even at work. Did you start with the word sorry? Don't do that anymore, okay? Now, we started tonight with a science experiment. I thought I would end tonight with a science experiment too, because there is a lot of talk about being left or right-brained, in that, oh no, I'm bad at arts because I'm a maths person, or I'm really bad at science because I'm quite good at sport. There's actually not all that much scientific evidence to suggest that that's true, that that's a thing. But we know through experiences that you do have left and right dominances in other areas, right? People are right-handed, left-handed. It might be easier for you to kick a ball with the right or your left foot, or in my case, neither of them. Did you know that you are also right or left-eyed? You have a dominant eye. And there are two ways that you can figure out which is your dominant eye, and I'm going to show you both of them. The first is to do this with your hand. Come on, get involved. And to look at something in the distance. I walk around a lot, but how about I stay still for this particular one? Look at me through the centre of your hand, okay? Don't focus on your hand, focus on me. Close one eye. Now close the other eye. Oh, sorry, open the first eye and then close the other eye. There's a couple of people in the front row just like... Okay, so close that one, open the other one. In one of those scenarios, you'll still be looking at me, okay? And in that case, that's your dominant eye. And in the other case, I'll jump out of the circle slightly, and that's your left's dominant eye. For me, it's my left. Is anyone else finding that their left is the dominant? It's about half. That's kind of weird. It's a little science experiment for myself. Okay, there's another way that you can do this. Do this one as well. The length of your thumb is particularly good for doing this. So you need to just pop out like that, and instead of looking through an object, obviously, this time you are covering an object. So cover me now. That is a legit way of being able to do it. In one case, you will see that I'm slightly more covered. This works better when you're further away, actually, so it might be a bit tricky in the auditorium today. And if I'm still being covered up, that's your dominant eye. And if I jump to the side, not actually physically jump to the side, then that's your less dominant eye. Now, what you've shown me today is that you are a room of curious people, okay? That you've been comfortable with asking yourself and asking of others a series of questions. And that is awesome. You've proved it to me, and you've proved it to everyone else in the room. But the most important message for you to go out with today is that now it's up to you to go prove it to everybody else.